So this fireside meeting is obviously a virtual one, although I am here in front of the beautiful fireside. Our fireside meetings are a long tradition of first Mondays of most months of the year, having some presentation either by a member or a member of our community. And they go back decades and decades. So it's a delight to be able to continue them, even though we can't all be gathering in the same place. Let me just also mention another event that we will be doing next month, the first Monday. Well, actually, it won't be the first Monday. It normally would be, but we've moved it to the first Sunday of the month, and that will be December 6th. And it will be also part of the Hillside Club tradition, having a pageant here for the holidays. It will be virtual, of course, as is everything, but we're hoping to take advantage of that technology as opposed to being limited by it. Decades ago, Hillside Club members would put together lavish, what they would call Christmas pageants. And we're going to take some of those traditions and bring them forward into this year 2020 and celebrate a decades old and timeless universal tradition of celebrating as we move into the darkest and the longest day of the year, and then move into the light. We'll do that with song and music and poetry. We'll be hearing some of the talents of some of our members. We'll share a delicious meal that will be catered that you'll be able to pick up Sunday afternoon and then enjoy in your home. So we hope that you will join us for our holiday pageant here in Hillside Hall. And we'll invite you to do a little bit of dressing up, anything that suits you. If you've ever been to a Renaissance fair, that sort of thing would be fun. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Even just a wreath on your hair or wearing a peasant shirt would be fun. So that's just a little something to look forward to. And now it's my pleasure to welcome our speaker for the evening, Lori Caldwell. I got to meet Lori virtually again through the Ecology Center, where she has given a similar talk of a longer presentation about growing what you eat, eating what you grow. So even though tonight is election eve, and I am my vote button, that's all the politics you're going to have. No politics. It's just all going to be positive things we can control. I know that many of our Hillside Club members, like Jim, have really turned to gardening during this pandemic. You showed us beautiful pictures of your spring gardens. So it seemed like this would be the perfect time to involve ourselves in something that is positive. I'm going to ask people to mute themselves if they aren't already.
Arlene, I will mute everyone now, but that will mean you will need to unmute yourself.
Okay, that's fine. There we go. So I called this the Zen of Autumn Planting, delving into the dirt and communing with compost. And that is especially appropriate for Lori. Lori goes by the moniker of Compost Gal. She is a self-proclaimed mulch maven. She's worked with stock waste, does a lot of teaching, and declares herself her mission to connect people to the soil and all that it provides. And as we know, it provides really everything for us. She's been happily teaching sustainable gardening classes and transforming yards in the San Francisco Bay Area since 2007. It's my pleasure to welcome her to the Hillside Club, Lori Caldwell. Let me see if you want to put the spotlight on her now.
Hello.
Yeah. She will now be speaker. Hello, Lori, welcome so much.
Hello, everyone. Hello, good evening, welcome. Welcome to my bedroom.
Your office.
Yeah, exactly, pretty much.
All of our offices.
Pretty much. Well, great, yes. I'm
I
sorry.
will now endeavor to share my screen, and I realize I've got a great deal of things on my screen, so bear with me just a moment. So Laura,
All
if you
right.
want to keep talking, you can just tell people a little bit about what you're going to share tonight.
Sure. So our main focus, of course, is going to be on growing edible crops. I'll be able to talk about things about annual crops, perennial crops, and growing in ground or growing in containers. So please, definitely come with your questions. I really do enjoy the aspect of teaching, so I'm hoping everybody will be able to take away a little bit from this as well. And then Arlene, I'm sorry, I forgot. I wanted to email you some handouts that you can distribute to
And
everyone.
we can certainly do that later. Yeah, we
Okay.
have everyone's email address.
Okay.
And
there's some accompanying material that I would like to share.
super. And it occurs to me that I had some of your handouts too about aphids and other pesticides and such. So, and I should have shared those. So yes, if you will, whatever you would like,
absolutely.
get those
Absolutely.
out to people. I'll just go ahead and say to Jim, I don't have the ability to share my screen. It says, so Jim, you're going to have to do that. Oh, no, there we go. I got it. Excellent.
My mea culpa, it's your screen to share.
Okay, super. Thank you so much. And now, all right, we need to find it. Yeah.
While you are finding it, Arlene, I realized I would also like to mention for those who are here perhaps for the first time that another annual tradition of ours is coming up very soon, which is the Members Art Show. We have a number of very active artists as members, and this year, as with everything else, it will be virtual, but we have a gallery reveal beginning on November 8th. That our club manager Araceli and Mari Litsky, who is overseen the Members Art Show for many years, have put together, and I'll put the link to that in the chat.
Great. All right. So now let me go back to Zoom. Have it up. Go. Alrighty. And we'll put that.
There we go. Yeah, we can just start from the beginning.
Yep.
Oh, you'll have to go back to the beginning. There we go. All right. And you'll be my Vanna, Arlene? I don't think I have the capacity to, do I have the capacity to? Okay, yeah. So, okay, cool. Thank you. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So Eat What You Grow. Of course, we have a couple of great examples here from some gardens, my own gardens and some other gardens that I've worked at. Like Arlene said, I am the compost gal. So a lot of my focus is always going to be on techniques, easy ways for us to be able to build healthy soil. I think healthy soil is especially very important, not only just to growing edibles, but really to growing kind of anything. I mean, weeds do very well in poor soil. So we could just build up that soil. Like I always say when I teach is you love the soil and then it's just going to love you right back by keeping your plants healthy, free from pests and diseases, and a lot of other things that we will definitely cover here in the talk. So next slide, please. So of course, we're going to talk about the benefits of growing your own food. And if you're already growing your own food, I would love to have you add to that for me. That would be great. Again, I talked about soil fertility and how important it is, how it's the foundation for any successful garden. We're going to talk about the kind of how and whys of growing food, seeds versus starts. I'm going to talk about transplanting seeds outside. And then we're going to talk about integrated pest management, which is a a kind of a great way of being able to tackle different types of pest issues in your garden without the use of toxic chemicals. Or if you have to use a chemical after trying all other things, then you're going to opt for the least toxic method. All right. And then, of course, questions and answers at the end. So why grow your own food? It's actually quite healthier. Most of our meals come from about 1,200, 1,300 miles away. So as we're working our way into our winter months, you'll still find that there are a lot of things that would normally not be, say, maybe at a local farmer's market. Things like strawberries and things that aren't necessarily right in season. And because they are coming from such far distances, they have to be picked prior to actual ripening, picked prior to the peak of where they are, where they are the best, because that type of produce, ripe produce, doesn't travel. So it has to be picked earlier. It's not as nutritious. And then as it travels by, by truck, by train, by boat, by another truck, maybe another train, and it makes its way to the supermarket, it's built up a lot of miles, and there's been a lot of inputs. And of course, there's been a very significant amount of greenhouse gases involved with that. And then on the very end, it gets to a situation where the unripe produce is being forced to ripen, usually by some sort of gas or something, to make it ripe, and then really doesn't. So there's so many inputs involved in of our food coming from so far away, when you could just really go out to your front door, your back door, your patio, your community garden, and then pick something that's local, within season, and fresh. That there's not going to be any kind of issues with it, and you can pick it when it's nice and ripe, when it needs to be picked. Absolutely. Gardening can be less expensive. I'm a huge proponent of things like reuse, using things that you already have existing, maybe already in your kitchen or in your backyard, to garden. Gardening can be an expensive endeavor, but only if you choose for it to be. And there's a lot of great ways that you can really kind of cut down on a lot of the things. So in that case, things like seeds, then it ends up being definitely less expensive than, say, buying a farm. And then the final thing, to me personally, I really think it's fun. And for those who already garden, hopefully you're experienced this when you decide what you're having for whatever meal by whatever happens to be growing in your backyard or in your community garden or on your patio. So there's really a lot of excitement involved with that. So growing your own food, above everything, all the other great, healthy, and ecological reasons to do it, it just ends up being very, very fun. All right, next one. All right, soil fertility and building healthy soil. So these are three little partners that I like to incorporate in most of my gardens. So in the top left-hand corner, I have my worm bin. No, that's my actual worm bin. And by placing red wriggler worms and some of my food scraps, fruit and vegetable peelings, eggshells, coffee grounds, tea bags, stuff like that, and just putting it in just a simple rubber toter with a lid, I'm creating this fantastic fertilizer that's high in nitrogen, helps to hold onto water a lot longer, and then of course keeps that soil healthy. Absolutely. And worm castings, I find I like to use those in all of my gardens, including things like houseplants. On the far right, we have an example of what's commonly known as basic compost. It's done outdoors. The worm bins that I have and the one in the top left, I actually keep those in my living room. And I find them to be very accessible for me, able to feed them and also to harvest from them. The basic compost is located in my backyard, and that's usually a combination of the food scraps that I try to share with my worm bin, as well as things like yard waste or mulch, leaves, prunings, that type of stuff. It creates a great soil amendment as opposed to like the worm castings, which is a little bit more higher in the nutritional value, like I said, a little bit more higher in nitrogen, and should be treated more like a fertilizer. But the basic compost on the right is a soil amendment. So I can use that in a lot of different configurations, mixing with my soil or putting it on top of my soil, but they still have both great benefits. And then on the bottom is a great example of mulch. Mulch is a great way to help suppress weeds, as well as to hold on to water a lot longer in your landscape. And excuse me, because it is an organic, it's a biodegradable product, that mulch will eventually break down and work its way into your soil and provide nutrition, as well as, especially if you're in a situation where you have clay soils, it's going to really open up that clay soil and increase its drainage and make it more accessible to things like roots. Next, please. So when you're thinking about doing a garden, if you're thinking about gardening in your own soil, so maybe you're doing raised beds or you're just doing some in-ground planting, I think the first thing you should take into consideration is, do you know what kind of soil that you have? Generally, the two soil types we have here in the Bay Area are either clay, and you'll know you have it. You dig a hole and you fill it up with water, and then you come back 2 hours later and the water hasn't moved at all. Very hard to dig in. It has a tendency to shrink during these summer months. You could make ashtrays or pots out of it, then you definitely have clay. The other soil type is the type that I have. I live here in Martinez. We have sandy soil, so drains a lot of water, drains a lot of nutrition, and usually plants that are grown in sandy situations have a tendency to be a little bit more leggy, not as bushy, because they're trying to hold on to purchase and try to spread the roots out and pretty much just shifting soil. So the thing I always love to tell people, and it's a very easy test to do, is called the nitty-gritty dirt test. So you're going to take an empty jar and take the label off, just any kind of jar with a lid, spaghetti sauce, salsa, whatever. And you're going to take several handfuls of your soil, put it in the jar, fill that jar up with water, and then give it a really good shake. Then it takes about 24 hours for the layers to settle. And then you'll have a good indication of what kind of soil type you have. But most likely, not everybody has all sand or not everybody has all clay. Everyone's going to have a proportion of a mixture or another. In my case, I have sand, so it's going to be a big chunk of it's going to be sand, and then there's just going to be a little bit of clay on top. Sand is going to be, of course, a little bit lighter in color. It's going to be, the particles are much larger than clay. So those guys are going to settle to the very bottom. And again, of course, they're going to be sandy in color. And then as the clay starts to settle, that's going to be much darker in color, and it's going to settle itself right on top of the sand. So maybe you have 50-50 sand and clay, or you have, 2/3 sand, 1/3 clay. But the idea being that, say I have half sand, half clay, which is really the kind of what we're really looking for. The water holding capabilities and nutritional capabilities of clay with the drainage capabilities of sand mixed together with enough organic material to make what we like to call loam. So we use that, I've heard the term loamy sand or loamy clay. So you'll have the layers of sand, you have whatever layer of clay that is on top, and then there's going to be some floaties right up the top near the lid. That just gives you a good indication of how much organic material you have in your soil. If it's thick, then you're doing a pretty good job of incorporating a lot of organic material in your soil. If you have none, that means you definitely have to add some more. And the best part about it is, in order to really kind of get that loamy kind of situation or have enough organic material in your soil to make it very functional, all you really need is about 5% of organic material. And that can easily be done just by one of the 3 things that I showed you in the previous slide. So again, if you kind of know what you're working with, it's going to be a lot easier to garden. And you'll know, you can see what the plants are about. All right. So building healthy soil. So I talked about things being kind of high in nitrogen. What I'm really speaking about is talking about that NPK ratio. It's the ratio of nitrogen to phosphorus to potassium. And these are kind of our building blocks of nutrition. Nitrogen, like the worm castings, it's going to be higher in nitrogen. So that first number is going to be higher than the other 2. Primarily, nitrogen is responsible for kind of the overall skeleton of the plants, the leaves, the stems, the main trunks of trees. So you're thinking about a lot of the fall crops that we are putting in our gardens now, things like kale or chard or spinach or cilantro, they rely solely on nitrogen in order to grow and to thrive. The second number is phosphorus. That's responsible for flower and fruit development. So if you've ever grown something, I did try to grow Brussels sprouts one year in the ground, and the plant was wonderful. The plant was at least 3 feet tall. The leaves were large and gorgeous, but the Brussels sprouts were tiny pea size. They, and Brussels sprouts can be small. But so I had enough nitrogen for my skeleton, but I didn't have enough phosphorus in order to produce a significant of a significant Brussels sprout or the fruit of the plant. So phosphorus is responsible for that. Usually for that, I like to incorporate something like bone meal. If you are a vegetarian or vegan and you want to opt to not do an animal product in your garden, I just did some research on a mined product called rock phosphate, which is higher in phosphorus than anything else. It's more of a kind of a long-term, a longer lasting product than say bone meal would be. So you could probably do it maybe like a once a season type of application, and it'll be able to significantly help your plants to develop flowers and fruit. I mean, plants in that stage are no different than say teenagers, where their bodies are changing. They're going from children, and they're going to be, their ultimate goal of course is going to be to pass off offspring, biologically speaking. So like hungry teenagers, they're going to want to eat everything in sight. So you have to keep those plants in transition fed in order to give them enough nutrition to give you, bigger fruits or more beautiful flowers. So the last one is potassium. That one is mostly responsible for like kind of the vim and vigor, metabolism, and overall health of your plants. And so, like I said, nitrogen, worm castings is going to be higher in nitrogen, but the basic compost, the NPK on that is 1 to 1 to 1. It's very even. So basic compost, we like to call it's kind of like the great leveler. By adding it, and not only you're adding moisture holding capabilities, but you're kind of bringing that NPK number just kind of back to kind of a neutral port in your soil. And then you can add additional things to kind of bump up depending on what you're trying to plant and whatever stage the plant is in. So some trace minerals, magnesium, calcium, and iron. Magnesium and iron exist very deep in the soil. So there's something to be said by planting things like perennials that have deeper roots next to annuals, which has more shallow roots. And then as the perennials pull those trace minerals up into the soil, the annuals have an opportunity to take advantage of that. All right, next slide. All right, good old compost. If you need to purchase compost, I like to go to a hardscape yard, and I like to touch my compost. I want to put my hand in it. I want to take it. I want to put it up to my nose and I want to give it a good sniff. I want it to smell sweet and kind of light and, kind of like not foresty, but almost kind of foresty. You don't want it to smell off or acrid or sour or anything like that. If it's hot, most likely that means that it hasn't been fully decomposed. So it's entirely up to you if you wanted to go ahead and purchase it. I guess it really all depends on the time. If it was a good enough deal, I would probably take it home and then put it on the ground, add a little water to it and throw a tarp over it for a couple of months and give it an opportunity to finish or to cure, as we like to call them in the compost biz, just give it opportunity for the compost to finish actual composting. But whether or not you purchase it or you make it, which of course I'm going to recommend everybody go out and start a compost pile if you can, you're going to use it in a variety of different ways. So say you are in the process of transitioning over from your summer garden into your fall winter garden. Maybe you've removed your plants, and this applies to containers as well. I do this with my containers all the time, and I have a solely container garden here in Martinez. It's top dressing. You're going to be applying about 1 to 2 inches of compost right on top of the soil. You don't necessarily have to mix it in, or if you're doing in ground, you don't have to till it in. Just putting it on top, and then as you water, and then worms are going to be coming up from the bottom and then grabbing it and then taking it back down throughout the soil profile. So that's called top dressing. So that's usually done with bed prep, starting any brand new beds. Side dressing is when you do things with compost and you're going to be putting them around the base of already established plants, whether they're annual plants or perennial plants. When I spoke about utilizing phosphorus or bone meal during these kind of flower and fruiting periods, I would use bone meal to side dress. I would use worm castings to side dress during the growing season as well. Backfill is when, say, maybe you're putting in maybe a fruit tree where you're going to be digging a large hole, taking out the soil, and then you're going to want to mix the compost and the soil together before you return it to the new tree. I find that if you put the compost on the bottom of the hole, it really doesn't encourage the roots to go anywhere because it has really pretty much everything that they need. But by mixing it throughout the soil, you're sending out a lot of roots out to go and grab it. And then sheet mulching, which is a great process of using a cardboard as a weed blocker, compost, and mulch on top. Next. All right. So I talked about worm castlings. Like I said, you're going to want to use it as a fertilizer. I just generally dilute it in a bucket to the color of weak tea, and I use that to water. Sometimes if you make it go darker or if you mix it too much, if I were to mix it with soil, I would only use about 20% of it. Again, it is higher nitrogen. So if you use too much, you have a tendency you could kill your plants. So that diluting it to a color of weak tea has always really served me really well as far as application. And again, it's great for making compost tea. It's great for starting seeds and of course for side dressing. All right, next slide. Some other amendments. I talked about bone meal. You can see it's very high in phosphorus. Things like alfalfa meal and kelp meal. Fish emulsion is pictured on the top right. It's a great high nitrogen source. It does smell like crazy, but it works very, very well. You just have to dilute it in water. And then coffee grounds, something that you may already have at home. I use those to compost with, as well as I apply those around the base of my plants. I'm gonna wanna go thin on coffee grounds. You can use them more often, but I would definitely go thin on them. If they get too thick, they can kind of, they can get moldy, and then the mold has no other place but to jump onto your plants. So, but it does add a lot of nitrogen, And it adds a little acidity to the soil as well, which it makes it easier for the plants to take up nutrition if their soil is slightly acidic. And this is great for container gardens as well as in bed gardens, in ground gardens too. Next. I spoke earlier about the wonders of mulch. Straw mulch, most likely for annuals, about 1 to 2 inches around plants. It holds on to water, but not as much water as, say, the mulch for perennial plants would. And when you're using mulch around plants, you want to make sure that you don't get the mulch all the way up to the main trunk or the main stem of your plant, because it does have these great water holding capabilities. This close to the main area may backfire and then actually probably kill your plant. So I always talk about, you not want to give a turtleneck, you want something a little bit off the shoulder. So you want a gap between your main stem and where the mulch starts. It's going to be great for applying fertilizers or soil amendments in this kind of bare area, and then still get the water holding and the weed blocking capabilities of the mulch as well. Next. All right, some other tactics for keeping your soil healthy. Try not to walk on wet soils, especially clay soils. They have a tendency to get compacted, especially when they're wet. And that's why they're just so sticky. Avoid rototilling whenever possible. Your soil actually would prefer to be kind of chunky. With tilling, it really has a tendency to kind of flatten out your soil. I like to use the analogy about rototilling and making mashed potatoes. I can make mashed potatoes with a hand mixer and I can whip them up, but then they become very uniform and then they become very flat. Or I can make mashed potatoes with a potato masher, and that finished product is varied. There may be some bigger chunks, some smaller chunks, but it's still kind of chunky. And in soil, you still want those gaps and those air spaces for water to pass through, for all the microorganisms and the macroorganisms that exist in the soil, for them to pass through too, especially in things like clay. And also when you till the soil, you release a fair amount of carbon into the atmosphere, which we're definitely trying to avoid. Avoid toxic chemicals in your garden. Again, they don't really do a good job of keeping the soil healthy, and that's what we really want to try to go for. Add organic materials or plants. So just try to avoid keeping anything bare, whether you have to put mulch on it or you have to put a plant on it. One of the saddest examples I always share is we just got, we're in the midst of fire season, but the routine is always the same. We have a fire event, and then soon after there's rains, and then soon after that there are mudslides. There's no organic material. Fortunately, there's no more leaves or grasses or even trees left over to hold the soil in place. So it's always good to try to, even if you have no idea what you're going to do with it, just put some mulch on top of it and just allow it for it to break down. It'll break down, and then by the time you're ready, you should be having some good soil to work with. Next. All right, some examples for my garden, but how and what to grow. Next. All right. Most plants do have some requirements. Leafy veggies generally need about 4 hours of sunlight. Anything that's going to produce a fruit needs about 6 hours of sunlight. So this is kind of the standard amount of time that you need, but there are a lot of different variables in play. In my yard, as you might be able to see behind that lovely kale plant, is my yard is paved over and surrounded by a 6-foot-high redwood fence. It's narrow, so it's close to the house. So the microclimate in my backyard is about 10 to 15 degrees different than the microclimate in my front yard. So even if I don't have the recommended amount of sunlight in my area, I can make up for that with things like heat, and that even does apply even in the or winter, in the winter time. So take these things into consideration, but don't solely rely on them. They're not totally tried and true. You're just going to have to play around with it a little bit in your garden and see what's really going to work for you. Next. Watering it. I don't know if we can do, I'll pull up that question. I saw that, Kirk. I will pull up that question at the end, if you don't mind. Consider drip irrigation. Drip irrigation can be effective either in container or in bed gardenings. But hand watering can be, if not more efficient than drip irrigation. I personally like to hand water for a couple of reasons, because I actually like to spend time in my garden. When you're hand watering, it really does force you to kind of slow down and take a look at your garden. So that's when I usually discover that something's wrong, or maybe I have a pest, or there's a fruit that I had no idea that was there until I came out to water. So another thing about gardening is just the opportunity to make space for yourself in your garden, whether it be just a chair or just a place to sit or just something to hang out so you can be in your space. I mean, gardens are great and functional, but they have other great benefits as well. You're going to want to water the soil and not the leaves whenever possible. Sometimes if you've ever seen like a little kind of burn spot on your leaves because they've been watered and then the sun has come out and then there's a magnifying effect. And then it's just very, very concentrated, and then it may burn a hole in your leaves. You just definitely want to try to avoid that. I usually water either early in the morning or late in the evening. There are times when I will have to water in both of those situations, especially in the heat of the summer. But yeah, water late and early, or late, usually after the sun has moved off of my garden, but it's still warm outside. And then in the summertime, for my containers, I like to put saucers underneath the containers that I can to collect any water. Maybe the containers may be dried out. I'm going to water it, but I want to be able to capture that water and then have the plant kind of reabsorb it. And then in the wintertime, those saucers get removed, and then I put my containers up on bricks to avoid kind of the suction from the main drain hole. Sometimes, depending if it's on grass or it's on soil or even on cement, there's a suction that sometimes happens, or debris gets clogged in there, and now your main drain hole is plugged. And then as you water and as it rains, the water can't go anywhere, and then you could kill your plant. So if everything comes up, then I know that drainage is already kind of built in, and then I usually don't have to worry, especially in the winter time. Next. All right. So don't forget those perennials. Whether you have a container garden or not, I am currently growing a brown chicky fig, a Rangpur lime, and a Meyer lemon tree in my backyard. They're all in about 10, 15 gallon pots right now. But we're coming up on bare root fruit tree season, starting in about December. It's basically just a twig with some leaves, and then the roots are in a bag. They're going to charge you probably about half the normal price that they normally would for something that you would get in a big 10-gallon pot with a lot of soil and a pretty established tree. But bare roots are really easy to transplant. And then because of the price point, you're able to probably get as double the amount of trees that you have. So citrus trees are great. You can get those dwarf or semi-dwarf. I'm a huge fan of dwarf trees, just for the fact that I don't have to share the very top of my trees with squirrels and neighboring birds. I can access that fruit, and it comes up more of like a shrub than a tree. But unless you're trying to find something to hang out under, I always find the dwarf has a tendency to be very well adapted and grows very, very lovely. Herbs, especially kind of woody herbs, oregano, thyme, rosemary. You can plant those in containers to kind of save space. Also with rosemary, you kind of want to keep that a little bit under control. So putting it in a container would do good. Things like artichokes do great. And then tree collards. And I think I have a picture in the next slide. Arlene, if you could go to the next slide. Some examples. The tree collard on the left. Like I said, you could grow those great. There are perennial collard plant. They do great in hot and cold weather. I propagate them by cuttings. I could just cut those stems, divide them into 3-4 inch lengths, pass them around, and we all just go home and just stick it into the soil, and then it's going to grow and make more shoots. Lemon, fig, and then of course the persimmon on the bottom. Next. All right, so seeds versus starts. So seeds are a lot of fun. Usually the seed catalogs show up late January, early February. There's a lot more variety in seeds than some starts. I could go to a nursery and maybe I'm looking for tomato plants in the spring, and they may have 10, 15 varieties of tomato starts. And I think that's great. But I can look at a seed catalog and I can have 30 to 40 options. Some of them a little bit more climate appropriate for where I live. If you live closer, you live in a fog belt, or if you live somewhere where it's not as warm, there's going to be a variety for you to choose from. Diseases and pests aren't imported with seeds. Sometimes if you go out and you need to buy a start, I'm always going to look under the edge of the pot. I'm going to look if it's a 6-pack. I'm going to look underneath to see if there's any hop-alongs, maybe snails or slugs or cabbage worms. I definitely don't want to try to introduce those into my garden. And then the next thing about seeds is you can get a packet of seeds, 100 seeds, and if only 75% of those germinate, that's still the potential for 75 different plants. And then if you save seeds from the plants that you grow, you can expand on that even more. And then please, the expiration dates on seed packets, I guess it's supposed to be a guideline. I'm not really sure. I'm kind of unsure what the intention is, but we're trying to stay positive. So just make sure that if you think a seed is too old, just try it out and see. There's still a possibility that seeds do last a lot longer than you might expect them to. Like I said, it's really fun. They're fun to propagate. They're fun to transplant. And it's just a really fun way to kind of start off your season by starting your own plants. You need probably about 6 to 10 weeks, depending on the variety, before you have to plant them outside. So there is some advanced planning that's involved with starting with seeds. Starts, they're available on demand. Sometimes you'll start seeds, sometimes they die. Sometimes you just want to try something new. Sometimes maybe you want to plant a perennial. I can go out and get an artichoke seed, but it's going to take me a long while in order to get an artichoke to grow. So I'm probably going to go out and get an artichoke start. So it's really great for perennials. There's definitely not any prep work. You just have to take it from the nursery and, bring it home and put it in your garden. Next. Oh, yes. Never underestimate the power of seeds. The picture that you see is an heirloom variety that some students found in a clay ball in a cave in Winnipeg. And they discovered it was 800-year-old heirloom seed squash. So my point being that if we can resurrect the 800-year-old squash seed living in a cave, chances are I would definitely give maybe those collard plants seeds from 10 years ago. I would just give them a try. You never really know what's going to happen. Next. Different seed types. There's the heirloom variety, which you may be familiar with. Those are kind of the passed down from generation to generation type of seeds. Generally, they're much older, about 50 years or more. Heirloom varieties have a tendency to have a little bit more lower yields than conventional varieties. They don't always ripen all at the same time, which I'm totally fine with, especially in the spring and summer months when it's pretty much bumper crop. And the nice thing about it is you can save the seeds from those products and get what's known as a true seed, and then replant those year after year and get the same thing over and over again. Open pollinated is similar to heirloom as the fact that there are more newer varieties, and they've been either pollinated by the wind or by bees, or even by hand pollinated, your traditional kind of hand pollinating. Again, those bear true seeds, so you can use that for the same result. Hybrid seeds, and sometimes you'll see some labels would say like F1, F2 on them. You can't save those seeds and expect the result. Sometimes you can get one of the actual parents of the original seed, or sometimes the seeds don't germinate at all. The exception to this I'd like to talk about is, especially with things in the member of the squash family, they have a tendency to hybridize very, very quickly. One year I grew spaghetti squash, but I didn't plant spaghetti squash. I thought I was planting pumpkins. So obviously somebody in my neighborhood had spaghetti squash. And then as I was growing my pumpkins, I had a lot of bees kind of coming around and doing that. Sometimes you get weird hybrids. Sometimes you get something that's the complete opposite of what you planted. So slightly different than the actual hybridization of it, but the physical hybridization of it. But it does happen natural currently. Next. All right. So for germinating seeds, usually for fall and winter crops, I usually just sow seeds directly into the soil. It's just very easy, very slow process, which I don't mind because it's fall. But for summer and spring crops, if I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna do that indoors. Again, I like to do a lot of reuse, so I'll take things like 2-liter bottles or those large salad containers with the thin lids on them. Those make excellent greenhouses. I've used things like 8 cartons or toilet paper roll cartons, or reuse old 6-packs or 2-inch containers to line the bottoms of my new greenhouse. I'm going to plant some seeds. I'm going to keep them moist, and as soon as they start to emerge, my lid is going to definitely come off of that, and then I'm going to keep them damp and then allow them to grow and form true leaves. Those first 2 leaves that come out are just to kind of get photosynthesis going, try to make the plant grow. Then once the second set of leaves, the true leaves, which are much significantly larger, then your plant is in a much better position to transplant. Seed tape is a great activity, and I'll include that as part of the handouts, where you utilize things like newspaper or paper towels. In order to avoid things like thinning, it's great for very small seeds, especially things like carrot seeds. So I will take a strip out, I will take a pen or a pencil, I will mark off the distance that says on my seed packet. So maybe say for carrots, it's every 2 inches. So I'm gonna make a mark every 2 inches. I'm gonna make a glue out of cornstarch and water. And then once it cools, I'm gonna cook it. And once it cools, I'm gonna use that as my glue. So each mark gets a dot of glue, and each dot of glue gets a seed. I'm gonna dry it, and then I'm just gonna make a furrow in the soil, and I'm gonna lay it out and just cover it. And as the cornstarch and the newspaper or paper towel starts to disintegrate, now my plants are in a perfect position that I don't have to thin them. Sometimes they grow too close together. It's going to affect their growth, especially things like carrots, where they really need some good soil to kind of work their way through that way. Because it's hard to, once you pull them away from each other, sometimes unless you let them grow for a long time, it's difficult for them to take them out and then to retransplant them. So it just avoids trying to do thinning. So warm and sunny for germination. And then we're really just trying to keep the new seedlings damp, not wet. We would want to try to avoid any kind of moldy conditions. Next, please. All right, so transplanting. Once they've had opportunity, you have those true leaves good to go, and you want to go ahead and put them outside, especially as we're transitioning between seasons. Not so much between summer and fall and winter, but more about transitioning from spring into summer, because it's going to be colder outside, but these babies have been living in your laundry room or in your sunny spot, nice and warm in the somewhere in the 60 and 70 degree range. So taking them out and putting them out directly immediately is going to put them in shock. So you're going to do a process called hardening off, where you're just going to bring them in and out over the course of a few days, getting them adjusted to their new climate. I put them out in the morning the first day, leave them out for a few hours, bring them inside, and then gradually put them in a little bit more full sun. And then generally the day before I'm about to transplant them, I'm going to put them outside, and I'm going to leave them outside overnight, and then hopefully transplant them the next day. I like to transplant not on warm days. I prefer overcast days. There's a bit of a shock value sometimes when you transplant them. So you kind of want to make everything nice for them. So a little bit cooler temperatures, not as much sun, allow them to kind of get established. So when the sun does come out, they're a little bit more better equipped to handle it. I do like to utilize those soda bottles during those kind of cold snaps. I will go ahead and put them over the top of plants and put something take the cap off and cover the opening with something meshy, like an old nylon or cheesecloth or something like that. It's also great for keeping slugs and snails at bay as well. They like fresh, young, newly transplanted plants. Next, some things with pest control. Cabbage worm on the far left, tomato hornworm in the middle, snails on the bottom, and then on the far right, we have what's coming up right now, oxalis. Next. So snails and slugs, they come out at night and they eat, or early in the morning, and they come and they eat your nice tender plants. Barrier methods are always a really good option. I talked about using those 2-liter bottles in order to kind of keep them. If you're not a big fan of plastic, you can get yourself a glass cutter, and you could do the same thing with juice bottles or wine bottles, just so you can kind of press them in the soil and kind of create that barrier. There's the also option of traps, beer traps, shallow containers with beer, hand picking, which means going out at night with a lamp, picking them and crushing them. And then just the incorporation of using mulch in your garden is going to bring about the predaceous ground beetle. It's going to be kind of large, black and shiny, and they're going to live among the mulch. Their main food source, slugs and snails. If you do have to go with a toxic method, then Sluggo, which is iron phosphate, is probably the least toxic of toxic methods. But I would try other things first before going into that as well. Weeds, they come in so many forms. Sheet mulching, I talked about that barrier method with cardboard as the weed blocker, and mulch on top is going to be a great way to control weeds in large spaces. Hand pulling, soil is always going to be, hand pulling is always a lot better in the fall and winter time when the soil is actually moist. I would probably recommend if you're trying to pull weeds in the summertime, just to get the soil a little bit wet. That way you can take out the whole thing and the root. For weeds and cracks, I do vinegar Epsom salt combination, a gallon of vinegar and 2 cups of Epsom salts in a sprayer. It's great for weeds and cracks. Do it on a sunny day, which will help boost its power. Next. Gophers seem to be a common problem these days. So gopher cages for perennial plants, for fruit trees, 1/4-inch mesh hardware cloth hardware wire to line, to either make cages out of, or to line the base of raised beds in order to keep them. Because the idea is they still may nibble on the roots, but they won't be able to chuck the whole plant down into the hole. Next, aphids. So they're born pregnant. So the moment they show up, we're already behind, but they really do have fragile bodies. They breathe through their skin. They have this weird mutualistic relationship with ants where the ants protect them in exchange for that honeydew nectar. So if you ever see aphids, you'll notice that the leaves on your plants are very kind of sticky. It's that honeydew situation that the ants do definitely like. Hard spray with hose is a great way to control them. You can make a non-toxic spray. I do a cup of water and a tablespoon each of non-phosphate dish soap and vegetable oil. The vegetable oil is going to suffocate them. Again, they breathe through their skin. And then when you can hose off your plants again, and the soap will help kind of rinse away the oil. Prevention is always going to be a great key. So trying to plant plants that are going to be attracting beneficial insects, especially the lady beetle, which I like to include in this picture. Aphids are in the milkweed on the top left. But if you look at the top and the bottom, the top right, if you look at the example on the top and the bottom left, those are two different stages of the lady beetle life cycle. The one on the bottom kind of being the hungry teenager, the one that eats hundreds and hundreds of soft-bodied sap-sucking insects on the daily. And the one above is the next step up. And then the one above that is the more traditional one that you see. And I only point that out because if you ever see these guys in your garden, just know that they're not pests, that they're there working very, very hard to control these pest populations for you. Next. All right. So some tips. Please clean your tools, especially if you've handled diseased plants. Rubbing alcohol works well. If it's something like metal, I might just bring it into my house and run it through the gas, the flame. That'll kill everything. Keep a garden journal, your successes and failures. I like to incorporate when I've top dressed or when I've side dressed, when I've had any amendments to the soil. I like to keep track of that, keep track of when I start seeds, so you know kind of what to expect. Plant for pollinators and beneficial insects. There's a ton of native plants that you could do that do a great job for that. I talked about making space for kind of chill time and enjoyment. Have a cup of coffee, have a glass of wine out in your garden. And you will kill plants. Your plants, you will overlove them, you will underlove them. They will be taken out by pests. There'll be great years and there'll be some not so great years. That's all part and parcel of the gardening gig. So don't give up, just definitely keep trying. I also always try to recommend that if you've never planted something before, or you think you're kind of a seasoned kind of gardener, then try something new. This year, I am doing rhubarb for the first time, just for fun. Next. Any questions? All right. I think there are some questions in the chat. So let me go to that. All right. Oop, hold on. Oh, here we go. Mulch is just chipped up material that you're going to lay on top of the soil. Compost can be used as the mulch. If you're top dressing, it's kind of the same thing. But compost is going to break down a lot faster than, say, mulch would. So it's great if you could use them in the combination. So if you had a wood chipper, I would say, if you're pruning, doing trees, I would avoid eucalyptus, black walnut, and black locust. Those aren't my favorites. My favorite wood types. They have allelopathic properties. And I think the jury's still out whether or not those properties disappear when you turn them into mulch. So just to better be safe than sorry than have to shovel a ton of mulch that is not going to allow you to grow anything in your garden. So, so yeah, just a chipper. I talked about seed tapes. To ensure that coffee grounds don't go moldy. Like I said, you're going to want to go ahead and put them thin. Imagine you're making a sandwich and you have your slice of bread and you're going to put some mayonnaise on top. While maybe your instinct is to want to put a thick layer of mayonnaise on top, with coffee grounds, I still want to see the bread underneath. It's going to be kind of thin to win. So coffee grounds, not so much so I can't see my soil, but thin enough that they'll be able to incorporate into the soil a lot easier. And then you could definitely avoid that kind of moldy situation, even if you have to use them kind of on a more regular basis. I mean, most of my plants probably get coffee grounds once a week, maybe once or twice a week, depending on how much coffee I'm having that week.
And Laura, you had also mentioned that citrus particularly like the coffee grounds.
They do. Any kind of, citrus plants, they do. I have a Rangpur lime in my yard, and the first year I was doing an experiment, and I gave them primarily a lot of coffee grounds, and I got a lot of limes for our first year. So I think that was one of the main reasons for that. Is mulch just leaves, branches, bark? Yes. Through a wood chipper? Yes, definitely mulch. And then of course, again, it's something that's put on top. However, all those materials that you included could also be chipped down and incorporated mixed in with food waste and made into compost. So mulch is kind of like the base for compost if you want it to be, or it can definitely be just used in a mulch. Let's see. I recently heard a topic speaker get soil amendments. He claimed that commercial amendments move the soil away from fungal bees. I don't particularly have an opinion. Most of the other soil amendments, the primary soil amendment I use is just compost. It's compost that I make in my own backyard. So I don't think he would have any issue with that. Commercial amendments, I think, especially if you're trying to produce food, I mean, a worst case scenario, a phosphorus source, even if you have, that's usually the only, that and fish emulsion are the only two that I actually buy to use in my garden. So I think that there is a definite need because a lot of our soils are pretty much, denuded. It's great for native plants because they don't require a lot of nutrition. But if I'm trying to grow things like food, then I would definitely have to disagree with this, that there has to be some sort of intervention of, unless you make your own bone meal by yourself, that would be the only kind of thing that I would recommend, that adding some sort of commercial soil amendment, something that you can't find. I can use coffee grounds for nitrogen. I can dry up banana peels or get kelp meal for potassium, but phosphorus, unless I'm mining rock phosphate or working at a slaughterhouse, I would have difficulty to try to find a natural phosphorus source. Some of the ratios on the soil amendment slide. So I was just trying to point out on the soil amendment slide just the differences between things that are higher in nitrogen, that first number, versus things that are higher in phosphorus, which is the second number. And each one is a little bit different. I think the fish emulsion was 972, so higher in nitrogen, only followed by phosphorus, and of course potassium is small in smaller numbers. But it varies. So each one, even I could get a fish emulsion from one place and it's going to say the NPK is one thing, or get it from another place and the numbers may be different. But that nitrogen is always going to be the first higher number. So basically what I'm trying to say is, depending on what I'm trying to grow, I'm gonna need a formula in order for that. So nitrogen for the skeleton. Once it transitions, I'm definitely gonna need some phosphorus. And then kelp usually kind of comes along. Potassium usually just kind of comes along for the ride in the end anyway. What time, it is good to plant this time of year in the hills? Well, it's fall. And so basically all your brassicas, things like kale and chard, and you could do onions and garlic at this time of the year. Now is a great opportunity to incorporate things like lemons and limes. Most citrus needs a little bit of heat, but the nice thing about lemon and limes, they can handle a little bit more cooler, temperatures. So any kind of member of the onion family, chives, leeks, your regular, walking onions, or your round, your red, your white, your yellow onions. Those are great. Broccoli, cauliflower, collards, anything that's kind of green, lush, high in vitamin C, high in a lot of nutrition. Brussels sprouts. This is a great time of the year for that. And the nice thing about it is they really do really well with shorter days, and they really don't mind the cooler temperatures. I've seen people grow cabbage in the snow. So yeah, this would be a great time for that.
Lori, what about potatoes? Does that need to be summer, or could you do potatoes maybe in pots?
You could probably do potatoes in pots. I would actually recommend doing potatoes in pots just because it makes it a lot easier to harvest them. Because all you have to do is just dump out the pot. Otherwise, you're digging and maybe you're cutting through your already existing potatoes and that type of thing. So yeah, I could do that. You could put artichokes in this time of year. Like I said, I've got that rhubarb going on in the backyard. So it's a good time of the year for that as well as a lot of the perennial plants to take advantage of the cooler days to get them established. Winter rains to help get them established and get their roots go deep. That way they're kind of all set and ready to go prior to the hot weather coming. Let's see, I have a problem with the leaves on my zucchini wilt in direct sun, but perk up as the direct sunlight fades. Think of that's just heat, or it's just the reaction of your zucchini's plants to that closing off to conserve energy. And then when the sunlight fades, the temperature is a little bit cooler. So it's probably really, really hot where you are. Something ate my arugula. I guess, Stephanie, the question I have for you is, did it take the whole arugula, or did it just kind of work its way around the arugula, kind of make it into kind of a holy mosaic? If it's something that just kind of like, just cut it off, all you were left with a little bit of nub, I would definitely say that would probably be something that would be snails or slugs. If it was something kind of a little bit more on the holy end, or if they left a little bit, they ate the tops. It could also be the cabbage worm as well. They're really out and rampant right now. Snails and slugs will take the whole thing, but at least the cabbage worms, they're going to eat the leaves, but they're going to leave the ribs intact on the plants. Or birds, sometimes birds too.
Lori, we have a member who is a beekeeper, and so I'm going to anticipate a question. You mentioned about keeping mulch, avoiding bare soil, but there certainly are some insects and some bees, native bees especially, that want to burrow and they need bare soil. So what kind of balance can you recommend there?
Well, I mean, I guess it really all depends on what you are. If I'm going to be sheet mulching, or I'm going to be using some sort of mulch, but I'm trying to get rid of like a Bermuda grass situation, I'm going to want to cover that as much as I possibly can in order to really kill it. So bare areas most likely will have to be probably closer to the base, that kind of open area around the base of plants, or you may have to find a little situation where you don't do any mulching just to give them some sort of access, but then just kind of be, keep weeding and weeding in that area. So yeah, there's a lot of native beads that do live in the ground. So yeah, if you can make room for them, but like I said, if you're trying to get rid of something nasty, you're gonna want to make sure that that's dead before, because it may take over. That's the problem. It'll come up from the sides and then just start to kind of cover over your already existing kind of mulch area.
Right, and Bermuda grass is definitely one of those nasty things that we want.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's a heinous thing. I can't believe, people used to just use that for lawn.
Okay. You mentioned in another presentation about things that we could be starting now with cuttings, like fig trees. What other fruit trees can you recommend that would start well from cuttings? I'm sort of thinking of having a Hillside Club cutting swap someday where we could share the bounty of what we have. So what other would be good examples that would work for that?
Well, for a lot of plants that most citrus, most trees are going to rely mostly on a graft versus a cutting. Fig is one of those wonderful exceptions to the rule where you could just cut a thing and put it in the ground. But other things like plums or lemons, you'll have to kind of either start that from a seed, or you might have to graft it to another existing tree with a similar genetic makeup. I'm not sure if they're having it this year. I wonder if they will have it this year. But usually in our area, on the Martin Luther King holiday in January, there is the Scion Exchange. The California Rare Fruit Society does their Scion Exchange. I think at I can't remember what center it is. It's outside of Ashby BART station, I believe. And it's just this great organization. They usually charge like a small nominal fee for you to come in. And then it's just this large conference room, and there's just large plastic bags full of the grafting bodies, the scions on the table. And you bring your own bags to take them. And then you take as many as you would like. They have classes on how to graft onto trees. And like I said, as long as it's still kind of genetically the same, you can go ahead and graft. So say you have a plum tree in your backyard and you go to the Scion Exchange and you pick up pluot or aprum scions. You can easily, because they all have plum in common, easily graft those onto your existing plant. So not only are you not having to buy another whole nother tree, but you're able to create a different type of fruit using this one similar rootstock, which is nice. And the same thing goes, I have a friend, she bought a grafted tree that's peaches, nectarines, and apricots all in one tree.
Cool. All right. Question, will gophers go after citrus?
The citrus tree? Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. If it's something, I've been finding that there's been a lot of gopher situations in sandy soil, just because it's a lot easier for them to travel. It's a little bit more difficult in a clay soil situation. So if you have any concerns, if you're planting something, if you're going to plant citrus in the ground, and you kind of know that there's gophers, and you'll know, check around your neighborhood, and just look for those mounds. Usually kind of next to other plants, kind of in corners. And then I would suggest either building a gopher cage or purchasing a gopher cage, just making sure you're going to want to accommodate that root ball, not only for when you plant it, but as it starts to kind of grow and mature as well.
I was pleased, Lori, that you gave me a good reason to, a good use for those plastic clamshells. Many of you know I'm a anti-plastic advocate and hate those clamshells, but I will now repurpose them as little mini greenhouses. So
yeah, I mean, they do a really great job. And like I said, you know, take some paper 8 cartons. The nice thing when you use the paper 8 cartons is when it comes time to transplant, you're just going to rip off the carton and then transplant the whole entire thing, carton, soil, and plant into your garden. So that will help with the whole transition as well.
I've done an extra step, and I don't know if maybe it works or not, but I actually put half an eggshell back in the egg carton so that be there, and then you've got a calcium source as well.
Yeah, calcium is great. Calcium is good. You can either just incorporate that on top of your soil. It never breaks down in compost. I'm sorry, Sally has a question about oxalis. Or you can grind it up and put it around the base of your plants. It acts as a barrier, another barrier. For them, it's like crawling over crushed glass. Right. So, and then as you water it, you still get double the benefits: slugs and snail protection, as well as that calcium. So oxalis. All right. So I guess the best defense for oxalis is really try to pull up as much of the entire plant as you can before it flowers. But unfortunately, that is not always going to be the easy way to do it. Unfortunately, oxalis propagates by the pollen in the flowers, the cut on the stems, as well as it makes these little bulblets that kind of live in the soil. So oxalis, and then even if you pull it, there's still, you know, birds and flyovers and wind and stuff like that. So I always tell everybody that oxalis is the type of thing where you have a relative that you're related to and you love because you're related to them, and they come to your house to visit and stay for about 3 to 4 months. Now you have this intimate relationship with them, and you know that they're annoying, but you can't help it. That you're kind of excited when they're there, but then you're happy when they're gone. That's kind of like oxalis. So it's something that you just kind of have to kind of keep on as much as you can in the interim. But unless you want to dig up all your soil and make yourself a sifter and sift it through, yeah, it's just really about kind of staying on top of it, unfortunately.
So if we want to go back to the topic for this evening, Zen of planting, I think the only thing to do really is to accept them as little pretty yellow flowers.
Yeah, if you have chickens and your chickens love them. So even if you don't have chickens, maybe you know somebody who has chickens, that would be a great the Zen of oxalis. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things. They're very, very hard to tackle. I've had great success with sheet mulching with Bermuda grass, however, but oxalis, it's the kind of the holy grail of weed control. It's kind of hard to do.
Right. Well, it's because they're corms. It's a very successful, it's built for success. And
it is. It definitely is. And I mean, I can't hate it. I can't hate it for that, because that's what it's made. That's what it's made for. Right. So
it's doing a really good job. It's
little too good.
It's a description. Yeah.
Yeah, a little too good of a job.
Any other final questions for Lori? Anybody wants to unmute if you have a question that hasn't been answered?
What about squirrels?
Oh, to keep them from digging in your yard?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a little bit difficult because they really don't care. I mean, the interactions I have with mine in my garden is they just basically look me in the face and continue to dig. I've heard good things about predator urine. Usually coyote, I'm assuming some sort of, higher level predator, to use that kind of to ring around. But they're pretty tenacious. I've heard about putting like forks or rocks or bricks, and they're gonna try to find a way to incorporate that for certain. So yeah, squirrels are kind of hard. Sorry, wish I had better news.
I have a comment.
Okay.
I'm interested in foraging, and I can grow herbs, but I have an aloe vera plant in my backyard, and I have daffodils and oxalis, which you can eat, and I have poppies, and I have roses. And I think that I feel better when I fail at doing bell peppers or whatever I'm trying to grow, because I can just run over and eat whatever I forage. So I think it's a good idea for people who are successful gardeners to have some things in the yard that they can forage too.
No, great. No, absolutely.
And
I agree. That's one nice thing about herbs are nice. I've been incorporating a lot of medicinal herbs into my garden as well.
Such as?
I just added comfrey and calendula, and I just got some mullein seeds that I'm going to be incorporating into my garden as well. I'm really excited about it. I did a big thing of chamomile this year, and mullein's great. It's helped me out a lot working outside and with the impact of the fires and stuff, just as a kind of like a bronchial kind of relaxer, trying to force anything that I've inhaled out to kind of clear my lungs.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, so many herbs will continue over the years. Sage, had great luck with, it will overwinter. Oxalis, the oregano comes back. And as you said, rosemary is sort of the gift that keeps on giving. Sometimes
forever. That and mint, they keep on giving forever.
Yeah, for sure. We have a note in the chat about the Oakland Plant Exchange. That's nice. We'll check out and see if they are going to be continuing in this year.
They've been having a few events. I've been following them on Facebook, and it's a great opportunity, especially for succulents. I haven't seen too many edible fruits, any edible foods at the plant exchange, but if you're looking for things like succulents or things like house plants, the plant exchange is excellent on both of those.
And do they have a location where they meet, or is it?
Yes, they are located on, I believe it's Lincoln Avenue. They're right down the road from the big Mormon temple in Oakland.
Oh yeah.
Like literally like 2 doors down. Super. From there. Yeah, it's great.
All righty. Well, any other further questions or comments before we thank Lori for a most enjoyable and enlightening presentation?
Thank
I hope
you.
This will inspire a lot of you to plant some things that you can eat, forage, share with neighbors in this time.
Well, fall's a great time for that, especially if you've never grown anything before. The days are slower, the plants grow a little bit slower, and there's not as much rush and pressure that you would get from summer and winter, from spring and summer crops. So fall is a great time to grow some stuff and to be successful too. It's kind of a cheat, but I'll take it, So fall's a really great time. Get some seeds, check out some local seed libraries as well. If you can, I know some of the libraries are open.
And the Ecology Center. The Ecology Center has a fabulous seed library.
Yes, the Richmond Library, they have a seed library. And then there's been a lot of people, they've been doing a lot of those, the little mini book libraries. I know a lot of them have been transitioning to seed libraries as well. So yeah.
That's great. We all need a little success and reflection this autumn.
We do. We definitely do. We definitely need a win.
Thank you, Lori. I'm inspired. So, you know,
Oh,
I'm
great.
gonna be out there, but I realize now I've got to, you know, I thought I thought it was the deer I had to deal with, but now I know I have to face the gophers as well. So.
Oh, yeah. Gopher cages. There's also my friend, she had a big problem with gophers. She got a McAfee trap. There's the snap trap versions that you put in the hole. Her big advice would be to tie a rope to the trap and stake it outside the hole. So then when it does snap, you could just pull on the rope instead of having to stick your hand in there and retrieve a trap that may have kind of traveled a little bit too. So she's had really good success with the snap trap.
I may just try the gopher cages, but it's clearly I should think about it now before the gopher.
Absolutely, yeah. And also prevention, exactly. Because I've heard horror stories where, you know, people have just literally seen their plants just disappear right in front of their eyes, like if they were watching like a cartoon or something. So.
All
So
right.
let me know, Jim, if you have any questions about compost, contact me. The handouts that I'm going to be emailing will most likely have any of my contact information on there. So tell people,
you can also follow Lori on Compost Gal on Facebook.
Yeah.
And she also posts other really heartening things as well, in addition to gardening. So it's been a pleasure to meet you and to welcome you here to the club.
Thank you very much.
I hope that you all will look forward to joining us for the holiday pageant just about a month from now, December 6th. Be great fun and a nice way to end our year. And with that, is there anything else, Jim, before we say goodnight?
I would just, I realized that, Araceli, if you're still here, maybe it sounds like the art, the gallery art show is already open. I had thought it was opening on November 8th, but I was able to click through and see some of the art on display there, including some by Paul Litsky, who may still be here. So definitely, I'll paste it into the chat again, click through, and you can, it's lovely. It's set up so that you can see different doors to enter through, depending on which artist you want to explore, and you go into their personal page and gallery.
All right. Araceli, you want to unmute? And,
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
all righty. So the art show's open now in its virtual format. The pageant will be happening, and we will all pray for a positive outcome.
Indeed. Indeed.
Indeed.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so
Yes,
much for
thank
having
you.
me. I appreciate it.
Very
You'll have a great evening now.
Great presentation.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all take care.
Thank you, Lori.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Very nice. Oh, am I muted? Yes.
Yes, very good.
I got so many tips, but yeah, I've got gophers in the backyard. I know they're gonna go after that citrus next. There's no question.
I'll tell you the real, yes, gopher traps are good. Having a really aggressive dog or hungry and good skillful cat. I used to have an institute cat who caught voles for me every day, and he was brilliant at it. Foxes are wonderful.
We have both of those, but I keep seeing the mole mounds, or not mole mound, the gopher mounds showing up everywhere. So I'm like, I know our cat is looking for this gopher. I don't think it's found this gopher.
Gophers are hard for cats. I had a pair of, I grew up
Yeah.
pair of dogs, and the mother dog trot her son, and they would tag team and catch gophers. But gophers are too big for cats. Voles are about the right size. Fox is perfect.
Yeah.
So,
I just know, given my luck with the deer and the citrus, I go, if I don't start now, I think that I think it's the cage I have to think about.
yeah.
But no,
And
this is wonderful.
maybe you could try the coyote urine or whatever.
Oh, right. But anyway, I got so much out of this, so I really enjoyed it. And
Yeah, and she's got a nice spirit. So
I don't know if it was part of the if it's part of like election activities to anyway. When I sent out the reminder, how I usually BCC everyone and sent out the reminder to the members, it came back and it was like denied by almost everyone for spam, as being spam, like rejected. But it's no different than anything I've sent.
yeah, it went right into my trash.
Yeah, but no, not the newsletter, but the
reminder.
when I send one like 5 minutes before. Yeah,
I didn't get that.
yeah, and almost all of them came back. I mean, it wasn't just one or two; it was like 150 of them. But it was like it's the basic thing I always do, which is join meeting now. I don't know, but that's what I do to just remind people that it's happening now. But if
which is a good thing usually.
Maybe anyway, I'm going to say
about 40.
There was at one point we had 29, I think, on, and it came up and down, but altogether registered were about 39, I think, registered.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I don't know. I blame the election. I blame the election on everything. So, or blame everything on the election, rather.
Right.
Oh wow. So, Jeannie, how did you enjoy it?
Oh, I do. I've been a food growing fanatic for years and years. So my front yard is a farm. So I'm with it all the way.
Excellent.
How do you handle the gophers, or do you not have any gophers?
No, thank goodness that's the only thing we do not have. We have, the deer, the raccoons, the whatever, the slugs, the snails. So I cover all the beds every single night with row cover.
I'm getting there though. I never thought
You don't need any more stuff. It's late.
Right. But you know what you said about the gophers pulling down I had some of that, that's called the I want to say it's like deer ears, or it's like one of these deer resistant little beautiful things. Yeah. I literally saw it being pulled down by the gopher, like as I was out there, it was being pulled down.
Most of those things never work. I've tried them all, including a sound system that makes the deer think that there's a mountain lion about to jump on them. Zero. But I shouldn't hold you up because it's late, but fantastic program.
It's okay. I would just say about the deer, the one thing that did work, but it got too expensive, was that I would dump cayenne pepper on
Yeah.
But that cayenne pepper is not cheap. So
no, and you have to do it all the time. I mean, you miss one night and it's all over.
I know.
But thank you so much.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Good night, everyone.